Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our backyard. It's already a beautiful Sunday morning. The sun is shining on the garden. And I'm going to take the time this morning, as usual, like we have started doing every Sunday morning, Aislinn and Joe, and showing you around our backyard garden and where we're at and how that's going. And of course, showing off our ladies, our chickens. So the things we're going to work on this morning are, you see that I've got my basket and my shears. I'm going to do a little bit of harvesting with you all this morning. I'm definitely going to show you around the current garden that's already planted, talk about what's planted, when those things maybe got planted, and how I maintain them through the winter time. And then I'm going to show off the new garden area and what I have begun planting over there and what's already in the ground over there. Talk a little bit about things you can do to get going in your backyard, and then we definitely are going to have a chicken adventure. Our chickens have got a new patrol area, so we'll take you over there and show you what's going on with them. So in the meantime, let's get started right away.
I'm the neophyte gardener that doesn't know anything, and in the spirit of there are no dumb questions, yeah, I'm going to ask them all.
Please ask all the dumb questions you have. If you have not dumb questions, any question at all is not dumb, please ask it on the live, and I'll be happy to answer it. If it doesn't get answered on the live today, it will get answered later on. And if you see me out in public, ask me questions. I'm happy to answer them as best I can. The easiest way to answer them is to show you, hands-on. So, what I have here is a bunch of arugula. All of this arugula came up by volunteer seeds, basically because I have flowers like this coming up last season. Same thing, this arugula came up from everywhere. Arugula is really good crisps like the kale. And one thing is that the flea beetles really like it. That's what's the little dots there. If you're not bothered by that because you're not selling at a very fancy farmer's market boutique, then it doesn't really even matter that the fleas are eating the flea beetles. Look, there's a flea beetle right there. Can you see it? Can you see that? That's what that little black beetle bug right there is.
So that's what's gnawing the holes in your arugula leaves. Got
yeah.
it.
And so I like to leave some of the flowers.
Does it just stay on the arugula, or will it go to other plants?
It goes to other things. It likes mustard greens. It likes soft leaves, but with a bitter taste. So I've been just cutting off some of these, trimming them up, and putting them in my salad mixes, putting them in with my kale chips when I'm making kale chips. They're really delicious. It has a nutty flavor to it, arugula. Some arugula can be spicy. There's one called wasabi arugula that can be really spicy. I also will like to go ahead and take off some of the flowers so I don't have too many flowering. I most likely will throw those to the chickens. But one thing to know is once you cut a flower, you're usually going to cut it above the two leaf like that. When you cut that flower, it's going to then grow into two more stems. So when you trim your flowers, that's a good way to do it. I actually was doing some flower trimming this last couple of days. Over here I have lots of red salvia that I've talked about. And so one of the things I did on Valentine's Day with all these pretty red flowers, now I don't want to take out all my red flowers because those are for my hummingbirds, but some of the really nice ones while I'm clearing stuff up, I can go ahead and do the same thing and cut it out for a flower arrangement, but I'm going to cut it out in the two, right above the two leaf mark. And then what's going to happen is that's going to split into two big flowers again. So I can take this in and stick it in my arrangement for red flowers already. But you can do a little bit of that. Keep in mind, you know, the pretty flowers you have in your garden. And as you're thin them out and take them and put them inside and put them in your house. So come over here. Let me show you around some things that you'll see over here. This is a habanero pepper plant that got planted from one of the nurseries. And as you can see, it's got some flowers on it, so I am going to have some habaneros at some point on this. So this plant is a year old, and it did produce some, but it hasn't produced real well. The one I had in the front yard, I harvested probably 50 beautiful peppers from. Now this is one of the baby cabbages. I started it from seed. I put it in the ground probably in early January, late December, and they're still pretty small. You can see it with all the coverage around them. They're not getting a ton of sun, especially this time of year. But as the sun sets in, I may get some good cabbage right before it starts to really get hot.
That'll create a head of cabbage?
It'll create a head. If I planted it too late, it'll never really create a head. It'll go ahead and open on up and flower. Once it's begun to open up and flower, it's really no good anymore. Of course, I have this beautiful tomato plant that I've been growing on here. It is grown out. It is literally coming out of this pot. But then you can see I've got some tomatoes going over here, and then it's starting to put on new tomatoes. So over here you can see it's putting on new tomatoes, and it's got some yellow bud flowers right here. So
I'm always curious if someone wanted to go to the nursery today and buy a tomato plant, for example. They're inspired.
Yep.
That would be the way to go.
Yeah, they can absolutely do that.
Because you've had a lot of success in pots.
Well, but I also use the thing about tomato plants is they need a lot of calcium, and they also get mold really easily. So, there are concerns with growing in pots. You just have to tend them a little bit more. Actually, those got ignored completely, but I did have a lot of potted tomatoes, so to end up with only 2, is just kind of a low luck of the draw. I've got some beautiful Swiss chard that I'm cutting off of over here. This stem is edible, and then of course the leaf is edible. When it's this small, it's really good for a salad or even a small, just making some small dishes of some kind. Remember I told you that if I've got bird poop, I'm just going to cut that off and throw it out. This is unsanitary, so you don't want to eat that. So I'm going to give that one to the chickens. I've got a smaller cauliflower over here. You'll see at the end of this tour of the garden, the big cauliflower. Okay, so this is kale. I am harvesting kale. I like these big pieces. These are great for your kale chips. If I want to do a salad with kale, I'd take off some of the smaller ones.
Or we could even wilt it in oil and garlic and onion.
Some more, I can harvest this stuff as well if I'm ready to. I've got this beautiful cilantro if I need a few pieces of cilantro like we did for the Super Bowl. This eggplant is coming on. It's starting to finally put some actual little baby eggplant, so I will start to have eggplant from this. I believe that this one was a listada. I planted, it's a year-old plant. It was actually in a pot before, I think I put it in the ground maybe in November. I took some things out of the pots that needed to be and filled in holes here in the garden.
I recognize the kale.
The pretty kale.
I recognize the cilantro. And now this is twice you've mentioned that the flower, that's where you get your fruit. Or your
that's exactly
actual
right.
edible vegetable.
And that's where the seed comes from. And each different plant, you eat a different part of it. So you eat the roots like carrots or radishes. And then the plant goes to stem, so then you eat the stems, and then leaves. So that's like your lettuce and your kale and stuff like that. And then it goes to flower, and some you eat the flowers before they open, like cabbage or broccoli or cauliflower. And then they flower and go to fruit, which is your tomatoes, your melons, all of that kind of stuff. You also can eat the beans and the seeds at between flowering and fruiting.
I see some dill. I just recognize this.
Yep, that's exactly what that is dill.
Did you put some seeds there?
I sprinkled, I broadcasted seeds that created radish, lettuce, dill, kind of everywhere, cilantro.
And these dill plants will get big.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Okay. So over here in this garden, I've got another tomato. That's a San Marzano tomato. It is not in a pot. It actually got planted in the ground, I think probably in November. It was in a pot, and I just stuck it in the ground. Now, I've got some beautiful Swiss chard that I'm cutting off of every week, and it just keeps regrowing beautifully. I pulled a carrot out yesterday that wasn't great. I've got another carrot. It grew too long, so it started splitting. So let's go around this way. I've got some, this is basil right here. And that basil, it doesn't like the cold, but it's still doing well. It's still rooted in the ground, so it'll make a nice basil plant.
Basil really attracts bees, I remember.
Yes, but also basil helps your tomatoes, your eggplants, your peppers taste better and helps to keep the insects off. It's a good companion planting for your summer, for us, for your spring garden. Now, yarrow I've talked about a few times. This is a really good good plant for compost. It also makes pretty flowers. It also is good for your animals, so I will trim it up, and I've trimmed it up. I've got some spearmint coming up, and it's poking back out, so I kind of gave it some space to grow back out. I wanted this onion to have more room, so I trimmed that up. So I gave that to the chickens yesterday. I also had, look how small, and you saw the other Swiss chard in the other area. This is planted at the same time. So you can see that this one's a little bit too hidden.
That's not getting enough sun.
It's not getting enough sun. And this time of year, you know, things need to get access to enough sun. So I've got a lavender plant that's down deep inside there. That came out of a pot as well. It was looking really sad. It now looks really healthy. So I do pot a lot of things. I'll talk more about that over the weeks. But then when I can get them into the ground, I'll put them in the ground.
I see more
now,
purple kale.
Yes, this is that pretty, I don't know the variety, but it's similar to the Russian red, which is another one that I had over there. But this is really, really, really tasty for kale chips. Also, this eggplant now is going crazy. So you've seen me cut off a couple of bigger ones. Yesterday I cut off 3 small ones. The reason I cut them off is because they were banging around so much that they were getting marks on them. So if they get to the point where they're banging around so much in the wind or whatever that they're getting a bunch of ugly, like calloused marks on them, go ahead and take them off. But if they're hanging fine, if they're hanging to the left, whatever, you know, then go ahead and just let them keep growing, because I can get a nice sized one.
You brought those 3 eggplants in, and I made a eggplant pomodoro with pasta.
And my tomatoes.
Last night.
I had a whole thing of tomatoes,
it was
eggplants.
100% Aislinn grown.
All right. Okay, so here's that lettuce that I've been, I'm going to let it go a little bit longer. I'm not quite ready. But be careful with lettuce as it starts to warm up to these 80 degree temperatures, because it will bolt, which means flower, and then it will not taste good anymore. Lettuce is grown in the cool times of year. So be careful as you get into this time of year with your lettuce. It'll start to taste bitter. I've got an old pepper plant there that seems to be doing okay. It's got a bunch of flowers and a bunch of little new baby peppers on it. I think it's a jalapeno.
Point to that one.
That's this pepper plant right here.
No, so we're going to get some jalapenos.
I think that's what that is jalapenos. That's actually the Russian red kale right there. This is a New Zealand spinach that came up by volunteer from a pot. Look at that pot right there. So some of that came up all on its own, seeded all on its own, and then spread some seeds down here, and so I've got some coming up. I actually took some out of that pot and transplanted them over here. I'll show you that in just a second. So I think that's all from this garden that I've really worked hard to keep planted. Now, one of the things you've heard me talk about is the longevity spinach. Longevity spinach, you can take a cutting from someone else's and really just stick it in the ground and it'll grow more. This is an edible landscape, is like what I like to call it, because it'll grow really easily through the summer, through the winter, but you can use it for your animals. You can also use it for your own greens. We mix it in with all of our other kale, spinach, you know, things like that. And actually, you did use this to beef up the amount of spinach we had bought from the farmer's market, the traditional spinach.
When I made a sog paneer.
When you made the sog paneer. So you can use it for traditional spinach dishes as well. So I've got another Swiss chard plant that is been growing all year round, and I'm just keeping it trimmed. Some of these are the new ones that are starting to really stick out. More lettuce is coming up over here. Some of this was broadcast, some of it was reseeding. I grew lettuce in these gardens last year. A lot of those went to seed. So you see lots of stuff.
So when you say it went to seed, it dropped its own seeds.
Yep.
The year went around and it took
Yep.
off on its own.
Yep,
Wow.
exactly. Now this is a beautiful lavender plant. This plant was in a pot, and then I stuck it in the ground, and now it's got its, so there's certain lavender plants that will do really, really well in our region. I just added this one to it, which I probably should have added it to the other one over there. But this is a new, I think in November I bought it from the nursery, but this one I have been growing in a pot now for over a year. And it's flowering. Beautiful lavender. And the bees love any kind of blue or red flowers.
Well, it smells
Purple or
really
red
nice.
Flowers. Okay, so if you come around here, you're going to see some more of that curly leaf kale. I'm harvesting a lot of that stuff right now. And I planted these 2 plants yesterday. These I picked up at a local nursery. One of them is a chocolate beauty, and one of them is a pimento. I don't want either one of those to be hot, so I'm putting them over here away from the habanero and away from the jalapeno that you saw.
Oh,
over
if
there
they
in the
grow
gardens.
adjacent to one another.
They can be hot. They can be hot.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. This right here is a Barbados cherry that I picked up at the farmer's market. It was a very nice plant. It will grow into a bush, so I'll have 2 big bushes in this bed eventually. That's going to put on year-round a little edible fruit, a little cherry fruit. That plant almost died because when I got quiet in the summer and needed to rest, and my garden needed to rest, I didn't get the energy to get it in. I finally got the energy to get it in November, so it had time to really get rooted. I wasn't sure it was going to make it. Then all of a sudden it had a few little green leaves, and I was like, we're golden. We got this. And so these beds are really good. This is like a little nursing ground. I can do almost anything. I can put the old potted plants in the holes and fill in the holes and fill in the gaps. and I work real hard to do that as well. So that's really it for this little area. I did want to show you, you'll see some more bigger cabbage, but there's one of those tiny little baby cabbages that I have been talking about.
Point to it.
It's this one right here. Started by seed. We'll see whether I actually get any good stuff from it or not. So come over here a little bit. Okay, so over here I have, this stuff has been in this garden for maybe 2 years now. There's some sage and some marjoram or oregano. It's a type of oregano. This I can harvest really easily. What I try to do is harvest out of my my space that I'm walking. But with these, you want to harvest, you know, get down in there and kind of just clip off the. So I'm getting this stuff out of the way. I've got an herb drying rack in the house that I can dry stuff with Joe if he doesn't need it fresh right away. So I'm going to just clean this area up a little bit. You see, I just kind of took it out of my footpath. And now I've got all of this good stuff that I can take inside and put in the drying rack because it's ready to come out. Okay, so you see some more longevity spinach. I was trying to clean this bed up a little bit and I've got an older pepper plant back there in the back that I'm trying to get out of the way. You want me to go over there? I'm gonna walk this way and then we can see what we're doing here. Okay, now both of our shadows will be in the way.
That's what it is.
Okay, so what I have going on here is I do have some cabbage. I kind of want to trim it up a little bit. You can see that if I leave, one of the things it's good to do actually as often as you can, to leave the leaves that are staying on the ground, close to the ground, so that the cabbage will eat, the cabbage worms or whatever worms I have will eat that stuff instead of getting up here and eating on the good stuff. So, but I will try to cut it back if it's getting in the way. Now you can see these are snapdragons. I planted those snapdragons by seed. So know that you can plant snapdragons by seed. Ideally, I would suggest you begin putting your seeds in your little transplant pots in September, maybe even in August if you've got a cool enough space to do that at. Then that way you'll get these in the ground a little bit earlier. These look like maybe they were either getting too much water or there might be too much fertilizer right here because I do fertilize a lot. So sometimes when your leaves are getting too yellow like that, it's too much water or possibly too much fertilizer.
What kind of fertilizer do you, when you say you fertilize a lot?
I use organic pellet fertilizer, different brands, but always organic. I also use the compost from my chicken coop. I also use black cow manure. Probably what's been on this is in their potting mix or whatever. There's been the organic fertilizer.
So everyone recognizes that cauliflower.
Yes, and this is the smallest of the two that I have that are close to harvest. Now, as you see, when it's not real tight, but this is a real pretty one with the purple color in it. When it's not real tight, when it starts to loosen up, it's time to harvest it no matter what size it is. I'll show you a tight bound one here in just a minute. And you can see on the back here, I've got another cabbage that's coming up, but I've also got some dandelion right there. And that's really kind of a weed, but the chickens love it. So I'll just pick that out soon while the ground is soft. If you've got weeds in your garden, right now is the time to mess with them because your ground is soft right now. So if you've got that big clump grass, go ahead and pull that stuff out right now. Anything you can pull out right now, now's the time to do it. Do not wait until the ground is harder than a rock in the middle of summer to do your weeding. Be smarter than that. Okay, so I've got over there in the back, you can see some kale. That's actually dinosaur, Toscano kale. You'll hear about that. That's actually my favorite kale. I think it has a beautiful taste. I don't think it gets bitter until it's like the hot heat of the summer. Then in the back there, just some pretty paper white bulbs that I may actually pull out so that I can put them in the refrigerator and then put them back in again next year. I also have a few ornamental snap peas that are coming up. It's probably late for those, but they were broadcast, some reseeds that I broadcasted. That is just a vine that's growing up, an ornamental vine. I think it's actually a butterfly weed or something like that. Those of you that know more about ornamental plants probably know a lot of these plants better than I do. Okay, so over here in this last bed in this area of the garden, you'll see my kale over here. You'll see some red salvia just coming up like normal. This is a new pepper plant that I just planted. I'm really trying to protect it and give it its own space. It's a red Peter. Of course, at the I thought that was hilarious. But for whatever Peter is very expensive. It was a $7 plant, little plant. So I'm really going to be keeping an eye on what that plant can do for me, and see what kind of good the red Peter can do for me. Also, this is the Cuban oregano. This Cuban oregano has been in this bed for 2 or 3 years now, or as long as this bed's been here, that Cuban oregano has been here. All of these vines that you see all over this bed are all from the Cuban oregano, and that Cuban oregano will actually take over this bed if I let it. It doesn't like the winter, that's why it gets super small, but as the summer comes around, this will be growing everywhere, all over the place in this bed again. And it's just a matter of me wanting, and the thing about it is it's kind of just an edible landscape. It's very tasty, but you only need 1 leaf of it to make the oregano flavor. So it doesn't get used a ton, in our house, but we do have it, and it's pretty, and it makes a nice edible landscape during the summertime. So, okay. Now this is a sunflower that I have grown. I'm hoping it's actually one of the really big ones, the mammoth sunflower. But I'm keeping it trimmed up. Over here, some of these other ones that are growing back here in the back, I'm not keeping them trimmed up because I'm letting that space just be kind of wild and overgrown. But I'm not trying to grow any annuals over there. I'm trying to grow annuals over here. Now, you asked me yesterday, no, it wasn't you, it was my mom, perennial annual. Mm-hmm. Do you know perennial annual? Yeah. Okay, so perennial basically means...
Of course.
Shut up. Perennial actually means that it stays growing year-round. So these plants back here are perennial plants. They will not seed out, die, and then you'll have to put them in again next year. That's the same with this. Some perennial plants seed, reseed, and grow, reseed, and grow. So that's a possibility as well. But most of the stuff that we eat come from an annual plant. So a good food forest garden, a good permaculture garden has both perennial edibles and annual edibles mixed into it. In the meantime, what I'm trying to do here is create basically a place for things to grow up on. So eventually I'll either have some bush beans growing over here, maybe even a tomato, maybe some vining squash, something that can kind of take over this area back here, but I'm giving it a stand with the sunflower. The sunflower can grow up it. Back here, with some broadcasting space, I literally just threw out seeds. You can see I've got lettuce, you can see I've got radishes. I'm just letting that stuff take over the space right here. Got my kale again, all the onions. The onions have been filling in all of the holes. You can see some snapdragons there again. So I'm just filling in the holes, but I'm always making sure that I'm kind of giving myself a space to move around my garden. So I'm still up in here, and I'm not stepping on anything, that kind of thing. Now, this cauliflower is ready. I'm afraid that if I leave it on another week so that I can show you cutting it off, it will begin to open up like you saw that other one. It won't be as tight and nice anymore. So I think I'm gonna let that one get just this big, and I'm gonna go ahead and take it off with you guys today. So I'm taking off the whole plant. Some people might have a knife that they cut in down here. I like taking the whole plant.
So when you grow a cauliflower, one plant is one head of cauliflower.
Yep, exactly.
And that plant is done.
This plant is done.
As opposed to, say, eggplant, you can pick them, there's more, you can pick them, there's more.
And broccoli you can do differently. Broccoli, you can cut the heads off of broccoli, and then broccoli will make florets. That's when you go to the grocery store and you buy a bag of frozen florets, you're buying the extra. Cauliflower doesn't do that.
Show me that cauliflower.
Once cauliflower gets its head, it's done.
So what are we going to do with that cauliflower?
I imagine that this one would be really good in that, like, a roasted turmeric type of thing. When I have a really nice, beautiful first of something, most of the time I really want to just taste it. I want to know what it tastes like.
So we've been buying cauliflower from the farmers markets.
Yes.
But this is your first one to harvest this year?
So, and it's a really nice one. So so because it's a tight head, what can I do with this? I can make a really pretty roasted turmeric, one like a whole head. I can do something like that. Now some of the other ones that come out a little tighter, are a little looser, those might be perfect for the cauliflower rice that we like to make. Mm-hmm. One thing I want to point out is look in the space right here. What do you see?
Where the cauliflower was?
Yep.
It's empty.
Okay, so now I've got a space to plant a tomato and put a tomato cage maybe around it. Maybe one of my vining something or another. Tomatoes probably likely because I still have this stuff growing, and a tomato's going to take a while.
What are you leaning toward?
That's what I'm saying.
A tomato?
A tomato, because tomato's going to be small for a while while I grow this lettuce and radish over here. And then once this lettuce and radish is done, the tomato will begin to be big enough to take off, and I'll just need to use this stuff as trellising over here.
Is that a tomato from a nursery? Tomato that you've started
Hopefully
from
one
seed?
of mine. I'll show you. I've got some tomatoes that are coming from seed pretty well. I'm going to put my cauliflower that I harvested in my basket. All right. Okay, so that's pretty much it. That's what's going on in the garden. You're seeing what's planted. This stuff could have been planted this time of the year last year. It could have been planted in seed potting starts during the summertime. It could have been planted then in the ground in November, October, November, December, even January this year, because January was a good fine year to plant. One thing you always have to know, even if you've planted in January, we still have less daylight hours. So even if it's a nice cool summer, a warm summer, even if it's a nice warm winter, you will still have slow growing.
Because you're getting less sun.
Because you're getting less sun. Which means in the summertime you have overgrowing and overheating because you have so much sun, right? Okay, let's move over to the other part of the garden. Where are we on time today?
I have no idea.
We're getting close.
So you've got this sunflower, which you won't let me cut
Nope.
down,
And also, look,
even
there's
though
some
it's in the
dill.
middle of the yard.
There's some dill right here too.
So that's going to become a patch of just...
Yeah, as long as it's not hurting anything or getting in the way, why not just leave it there? It's going to put on flowers that the birds are going to like, and it's growing dill for me to use. Okay, so over here you've got my tomato plant. I want to show you this, because this sucker, be careful. Look at that. As I lift that up, look at all those tomatoes that are kind of hiding out in there.
What species?
I believe this one is the black creme. Now, I'm confused of black creme or Cherokee purple, and I don't have it labeled anymore, but I have two different plants that have very similar tomatoes. These tomatoes turn a dark red. They're not that bright red. I'm going to put in this hole where I've got a couple of sunflowers just coming up. I'm going to put one of my tomato plants in this hole. The thing that can be scary about a pot, especially a pot lifted up off the ground, is that it doesn't get enough water in the summertime, so these things have to stay watered, or in the wintertime it could freeze. So a lot of times you'll move these types of things to the ground. They get a little more warmth in the ground. But I'm going to leave it there and see how it does, because I like this trellising here. Now, Joe, why is this trellising here?
Okay, so when we put up this 4-foot tall temporary fence, which has become more permanent than I ever thought it would be, there was one chicken. Now that chicken's no longer with us. That would jump over that fence.
Yeah.
And you could use this ledge right here, and it was only 2 foot tall.
And then she'd go eat my garden.
So yeah, so then she'd go into the garden that you just gave us a tour of and, decimate it.
Yeah, she would have eaten that cauliflower.
I put an extra 4 foot up here to keep that chicken from jumping over the fence.
And then we had an
And then,
accidental perfect.
and then when a tomato took over, forget it. The plants win around here.
Well, and you had made the comment a few episodes back that that there were some sunflowers that kind of took off, some wild sunflowers.
Yeah, much like this one, I expect that this one will.
Yeah, and so they kind of just protected and like hid this stuff over here. And I would throw some water over here a little bit, but not too much. So so I've got that plant with a tomato in it. I've got a plant over here with a basil that's doing really well. I'm leaving that, as I told you before. Basil tastes really good with tomatoes. I also have put in right here sugar pie pumpkins in this pot. So even if only one of those plants takes over, it's going to grow all out here. And I'm letting this area become kind of cordoned off. I'm making a little garden over here with my pots and stuff like that. While my chickens are not over here, I've got this gate wide open. I might as well just let that be a little corner over there. So this is all my baby starts. These are the ones I planted from seed.
You took empty pots, filled them with a dirt mix that you created.
Potting soil mix, yep, with a little bit of peat moss
and then
in
put
it.
seeds in there.
Yep, so these are my melons that are just the latest planted.
When you say you've grown something from seed, this is what you're talking about.
Yep. And if you see them in 6-packs like this, they went from being in a little, being in a pack like that to them being upgraded. And then I'll just keep upgrading.
Now there's a lot of plants over here. What are you? You're not going to plant all of this back here, are you?
Well, no. No, I'm not. I'm going to donate some of it to the Learning Garden. Some of the bigger, like squash and melon, I'll probably take out to the farm to get my dad to plant at the farm. I'm going to try to get as many of the tomatoes in, but tomatoes and peppers and things like that I can give away. But this whole fence line and that whole fence line behind you, all of these fence lines, if I can grow that and that in a pot, I'm just going to put, I'm going to fill all my fence lines with pots of tomatoes. And maybe some peppers, mixing some peppers in there as well, because I've got a lot of plants. But I also have plants to give away. I also have plants for sale if people want to buy plants, and I'll give plants to the Learning Garden and stuff like that. Now, this is the garden I've been working on planting. This is the garden that I spent a lot of time planting on yesterday. So I've started out over here with the...
This is the first week that people have seen green coming out of these piles that we've been doing for the last few weeks.
Yep. And this is time. I mean, everything shows that we're at the moment to begin planting, really planting out time. Now, I like to do successional. Successional means I'm planting, and then the next week I'm planting something else, and then the next week I'm planting something else. So I'm doing a little bit of that, getting what I can get done now, and then I'll plant some more, basically every day through probably late April, maybe even May, depending on what May is looking like. I just keep planting.
But you have to have some kind of knowledge in your head about when it's time to plant what. There are certain things you can't plant right now.
Right.
That just comes with experience, I assume.
Yeah, and what plants, what likes the winter and what likes the summer.
The
way to know it is that it likes the winter if it's green. If you eat it, if it's a leaf or a flower, it likes the winter. If you eat it and it's a fruit or a seed, it likes the summer. It likes the spring. It likes the warmth. So this is a blue Hubbard squash, vining squash. It's going to take over this whole area over here. Even if only one of those plants takes off, or two, it's going to take over this whole section over here. Now that is a big blue squash. Can be this big, like a big blue dinosaur egg. And you actually made some once before.
Yeah, I made a blue Hubbard pie with it, and we used it in some kind of squash dish. It was sitting at the farmer's market for a couple of weeks, and no one wanted to. It's huge.
It's huge.
And
yeah.
people were intimidated, I think.
Yes.
And I was like,
I'll buy it.
I'll buy it.
So you made like a pumpkin pie out of it, basically.
So it's going to kind of take up this whole corner.
Yep. And so here's another one. So what will be growing in this corner over here will be blue Hubbard squash, which is like a pumpkin. Now I've done some sunflowers and other types of just random flower seeds, but sunflowers, because the sunflowers are going to give me, as you saw over there, some things to grow up on, just to give this stuff some stuff. This is the same pumpkin that you saw in that pot out there. It's a sugar pie pumpkin. I am determined to have pumpkins this year. They may not come in October, but I'm determined to have pumpkins this year. This is a spaghetti squash. If you haven't eaten spaghetti squash, I can't wait to show off that when it finally gets here. Now, when I say finally, we could be talking about 100 days from now, 120 days from now. So if you think about how many months that is, we're looking at a long time from now. We're looking at summertime before
how long it takes to harvest a pumpkin.
Yes, exactly. I've also got, this is one of my favorite flowers, stalk, snapdragons. I have some...
And the flowers are to encourage pollinators?
Encourage pollinators, encourage you to hang out and enjoy your garden because it's beautiful. Yeah, add pretty elements, but also add diversification and attract the pollinators. Now all the little greens poking up, some of them may be weeds that I'm learning about. I'm learning what weeds are coming out of these piles. And I'm leaving them because I want to know what's actually happening with them. And then once I see what it is, then I can pull it out if I don't want it in here. While your ground's soft is the time to pull things out. I also have planted over here bush squash. So the vining squash is like the blue Hubbard, the pumpkin, the spaghetti. That's what you would call a winter squash. I call it a vining squash. You might also call the summer squash bush squash. That's your crookneck, your straight neck yellows. I've planted some of that around the edge. And then on the bottoms, around the edge over here where I'm not afraid of vining, I've put in some more of my cucumbers. I love cucumbers. It's some of my absolute favorite food to eat. They like the spring. They do not like the heat of the summer. They turn bitter in the heat of the summer. So now make sure you get your cucumber in the ground right now. Cucumber on the edge of this one as well because it's going to vine.
Seeds.
Yes, I put those seeds in. Exactly. Exactly. On the front side of this, I put a gray zucchini, so it's going to bush. It's not going to grow out this way. That's what I'm going to try to keep it from growing out this way. It's going to stay here in this corner. The cucumbers I did back here so they can all run off back here. I put another vining. Cushaw makes a big, huge squash also. So we're going to have plenty of big, beautiful squash to give away, to share, to make all kinds of beautiful things with. Ideally, this vines. When you come see this garden at some point, you should see green vines all over the back of this area back here. So, okay, moving this way. This was a bush tomato that I bought, nice sized. When I talked about successional, that's a part of helping my successionality, is buying plants that are ahead of schedule. You saw my other tomato plants. Now I've got some younger tomato plants as well. These are bought from the nursery so they can give me a head start on the babies that you saw from me. I've got aroma here. I'm going to use this trellising to let it grow up. Some of these vining, indeterminate is another word you might hear for vining tomatoes. May actually grow all the way over the top and down to the other side. That's a possibility. I also planted, because I have this vining area, think you can companion plant, and I overplant. I always think that, because you saw my garden over there and you see the spaces that come, I try to overplant as often as I possibly can so that I am going to have a full coverage, and it's going to help to block out the weeds as well. It's going to help to cover my soil so my soil stays healthy and moist. So I've got yard-long beans that I put way in the back there. They will attach to this and grow straight up, like a perfect, nice, tight spiral, straight up. And then they make these really long green beans that are really good for fried, what do you call that stuff? That fried rice.
Stir-fried rice.
Stir-fry, they're good for that. This was a plant I just put in the ground, red salvia, who cares whether it stays. Stevia, that might be nice if that takes off. It was in the pot. This is a yellow pear tomato, so it's going to put on a little bitty yellow Juliet types tomatoes. This bush Goliath won't do too much sprawling because it's going to stay in a nice size determined bush tomato plant. But that's nice to have that, like, different types of coverage and stuff like that. Starting from here, going all the way around, I also have all different kinds of cucumbers. I've got 4 different varieties of cucumbers. 2 pickling. Pickling are your little cucumbers. Don't let them get much bigger than, a little cucumber, right? That's what you're looking for. That's what pickling is about. So potentially you would pickle those. You don't have to pickle them. You can just eat them. They're the best tasting. You can eat them that way. I also grew straight 8s, which is an 8-inch long cucumber. Those are good as well for growing on trellising types of things as well. And then the ones that I grew around the ground that'll sprawl out down here is a lemon cucumber. And so that's a little round cucumber like this that's yellow. Okay, so over here, the seeds that you have coming up, a lot of this is zinnias. The zinnias, actually, once you deadhead them, you can just throw those seeds back down. I will never not have zinnias growing in this space right here because I put some zinnia seeds down. You heard me talking about longevity, just cutting it off. I cut the pieces off. I just stuck that in there. I'll have longevity spinach growing out here for soon. I'm going to put some sprawling tomato plants in that back there, at least 1, maybe 2. I've also got 2 different kinds of pole beans. A tricolor mixed pole bean will go on some of this fence line. And then also on this fence line over here, a blue lake, blue lake pole bean. I will be looking for some bush beans wherever I have holes in both gardens to fill in some bush beans. Those are the ones that don't need the trellising. They're just going to make a nice bush size. I can put those around the bottom of different things. You'll watch over the time as you see me planting. I'm looking for that diversity. I'm looking for height. I'm looking for breadth. I'm looking for ground cover. I'm looking for sunflowers, as well as bushing squash, as well as vining squash, as well as poling beans, as well as bush covering beans, all of the things that are going to cover all my spaces. That's really going to help with the health of my garden. I'm going to mix these things up. You don't see them all in one row. You see them nicely mixed together. Now, what is this that you saw? I was cleaning. I'm about to head over to another area of the garden and we're going to show you quickly. But I basically just broadcast some seeds that I deadheaded. Deadheading means taking the dead seed head off of a flower. the best thing you can do with a deadhead is to just literally spread it back out again, because a couple of those seeds will come up, maybe a lot of those seeds will come up in your next flowering season. And so that's good. Okay, I'm taking you back to a new space back here, a new thing that we've done.
This is an area that has been completely ignored, and a little like construction dump zone for all the little projects. I put the extra materials back here. It's a little side porch that we have never really used.
But one of the things is it had there was a hot tub back here, and so there was a big hole in the ground, and we've been filling that hole in with mulch and stuff like that. And in the meantime, of course, it collects water back here. So all kinds of things are growing back here that so the birds are getting to have that. Right now I'm just letting them have their free reign on this area. Eat the seeds, eat the bugs, tear it up. We're gonna rake it up and keep filling that hole in over here because we're trying to level out the ground. I literally have a volunteer tomato plant right here in the center that already has some flowers on it.
So I put that wire around it just to keep the chickens off of it while they're back
exactly.
here.
Now I do get a little bit of sun over here at this time of day. Morning sun is ideal. That's what you want, morning sun. So if I'm getting a morning sun on this side over here right now, I'm probably perfect to grow a little summer garden bed on this corner of the house right here. Whatever I want it to be, you know, similar to over there, a nice mixture of pretty flowers and make it look nice. But I should be able to grow that right there and get perfect amount of sun at the perfect amount of day over there. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm putting in my repotting. So you've seen me on the other porch for where I've done my potting, repotting, transplant, starting my seeds, all of that stuff. I just need a comfortable place to sit and a place to stack my pots and to keep my soil and my amendments and things like that. I'm going to get this, basically this is going to be my garden office where I get to do that type of work. The main reason I'm moving this is because over on the other side of the house it gets that afternoon sun and it is blazing hot in the summertime and I don't want to work. And so this is giving me another comfortable place to work at and letting the gardens have it. So, okay, things I want you to know about. Please don't forget that Monday we launch episode 24 of Dinner Table Talks podcast. That's Joe and I. You can get that at dinnertabletalks.com. Of course, it's on all of the places that you use Apple, whatever, Apple Pod things, and what do you call all those different things, the pod things that people use?
Podcast services.
Spotify, podcast services, all of that kind of stuff. Google Podcasts.
Apple Podcasts.
You can listen to it wherever you listen to podcasts. That's Aislinn and Joe. We're talking about what we do with all these vegetables. We're talking about what we like to talk about with our friends at the dinner table. So tune in.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Someone is inspired.
Mm-hmm.
I've always wanted to garden. And look at what she's doing. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go today. I'm going to get some gardening done. Yeah. But I'm not quite as far along as you with the big mounds and all that. What would they do today?
Go buy some plants today and then go get some either potting soil mix or raised bed moss. And I have a few random big pots. Then go get yourself a few random big pots and then just plant them in the pots. Or gather up some of the trimmings from your trees and your leaves in your pile and cover the pile up with topsoil, potting soil, a little bit of fertilizer, and plant right into it. The first step is planting plants. Just plant plants. And don't let anybody convince you that there's so much other work to do.
And in the containers, they need to be watered real well.
They need to be watered really well. And that's the thing is, if you're putting in seeds or young plants, you gotta give them the watering attention. So don't forget, we'll be doing this next Sunday, same type of thing. We're here at 10:30 a.m. live. Please come. No, there's a chicken escaping. Let them know, let your friends know that we're here. If you have questions, please feel free to answer the question or ask me questions. Oh, now they're all escaping. I'm going to close the gate. All right.
Now we got something to do.
Now we have a chicken to chase. Oh my gosh. All right. We'll see you next time, 10:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings. Join us. Bye. Love you.